So Judd Apatow was obsessed with comedy. For years, he had read, watched, listened to anything he could get his hands on with or about comedians, any comedians. He even recorded the television talk shows on videocassette, because this was the early 1980s, and then he transcribed them by hand so that he could pick apart the jokes and understand how they were constructed. He got involved in his high school's radio station and started calling up the publicists and agents for various comedians, asking if he could interview their clients. And the answer was mostly, sure, why not? Now, there is an art to learning from people who are out of our league without being taught. And the very first step is to pick the right people. Well, they need to be ahead of where you are in the direction that you're trying to go. If you are trying to become an entrepreneur, you probably shouldn't be trying to talk to Bill Gates or Richard Branson. And there are a couple of reasons for this. I mean, first, it's really hard to get access to them. But also, it's been so long since they were where you are that they might not even remember what it was like. And also, the world is changing at a frantic pace. And so the circumstances that they made their way in might be dramatically different to yours and therefore basically irrelevant. So you want to talk to people who are ahead, but not too far ahead. Now, Judd Apatow is an outlier in that he talked to the top people in his industry at the time. And he was able to do this for a couple of reasons. The first is that in the early 80s, comedy wasn't really such a big deal, not as much as it is now. And the other is that when he called the publicists, he failed to mention that he was 15 years old and working for a school radio. It's really important to prepare once you have someone to talk to. Read their blogs, read their books, watch their talks, listen to the interviews, find their resume, try to reconstruct a timeline of the steps that they took to get to where they are now. Apatow knew everything there was to know about the comedians that he interviewed. This is a kid who wrote a 30-page paper on the Marx Brothers when he was 10 years old. Not for school, just because he was interested. Being well prepared will ensure that you don't ask them questions that Google could tell you the answers to. It's really tricky to tease out the key behaviors that drive success. The key factor of this person's success might be a behavior that is simple and obvious to them. So simple and obvious that it wouldn't even occur to them to mention it. And so to help draw out these behaviors, it can be useful to start asking for comparisons. Ask about the people who were in the same place at the same time and who didn't have the same measure of success. What did they do differently? Apatow typically asked about the nitty-gritty details of the craft of being a comedian, and he always brought it back to specifics. This joke about the guy who caught the bullet in his teeth, where did you get that idea from? How did you develop it? You pulled up a TV guide on the Letterman show recently and riffed on that. How come? At one point, he asked Jay Leno if he thought that TV was really bad, because he made fun of it a lot. And Leno observed that the trick to being a successful comedian was to make fun of things you like, and that sometimes he'd make fun of something he didn't like, and it would come across as vicious. In doing these interviews, Apatow wasn't asking, how can I get to where you are? He was asking, how did you get to where you are? From your perspective, what were the crossroads? Why did you take the one to the left? Where were the potholes? What detours did you make? Was the scenery worth it? And this is important, because their path is not your path. This interview isn't about trying to figure out how to reproduce their story. It's about identifying key skills that will help you advance in your career. And to do that, you'll need to do more than one interview, probably even more than 2 or 3. Apatow interviewed 45 comedians or so. He's a little bit of an overachiever. You won't need that many. The basic idea is to keep going until you achieve saturation, that point where the interviews are bringing up broadly similar themes or concepts, or you're able to discern some useful pattern. And once you've identified an important skill, then prepare an actual, honest-to-goodness plan for improving that skill. And the most useful resource I've found for doing that effectively is the Top Performer course by Cal Newport and also Scott Young.